All
All
right.
right.
I think we're live, Jake.
I think we are live. Awesome. Well, everyone, thank you for everyone that is on the call right now. I want to thank you guys. And to answer that first question, there will be a recording of this after the fact. So we will put that up online and send out that link so you can check out this as well. So thank you for asking, though, and we will be sure to do that. But my name is Jake, and I work here at Gunyo, running marketing. And this week, super excited to bring Marcus Blankenship on the call, who Marcus specializes really in kind of coaching and helping development agencies grow and also figure out how to manage development talent is something he speaks a lot about. So we want to kind of do this Q&A session with Marcus today and let you guys kind of ask him any questions you have just about how to manage development talent, anything really along those lines about how to build a team, how to deal with firing people, all that kind of fun stuff, or just really any questions you have about working with developers. Marcus is your guy. So yeah, I guess, Marcus, I've kind of seeded you with some initial questions. We'll see if
Yeah.
other people hop in here, but
Yeah.
do you
Thank
want to
you, Jake.
dive in?
I really appreciate it. Yeah. And just as a bit of format, so we are using the Google Hangout Q&A app. Feel free to ask questions there, and happy to answer them. Um, so the first question that we got was, how can you avoid putting your team into situations where they're pulling all-nighters leading up to the deadline? And certainly I've never had that problem, nor I've never pulled an all-nighter or had my team do that. But no, that's not true at all. We all have to some extent, but it's never the optimal situation. And I think these kinds of situations, oftentimes we're actually our own worst enemy, to be honest. So while a lot of times I've noticed that developers are actually worse at this, I think, than development managers. And that is, sometimes we like to be the heroes, and we will actually subconsciously engineer situations by which we end up pulling all-nighters or taking heroic efforts. And I think that culturally, if you're hiring developers, and what you want to do is create an organization that doesn't really reward heroism, which might sound really odd. If somebody stayed up all night, wouldn't you want to reward them? Well, you might if you really needed to, but I think the root cause is, if you have people or teams that are doing a lot of things last minute, you need to be digging into why that needed to wait to the last minute. Why were things, how did things come about? What was the root cause? Developers like to do things that gain them applause. I like to do things that gained me applause. And so, to be honest, when I was a young developer, I would sometimes engineer, like I said, these situations. But generally, as the development manager, it's your job to make sure that folks have a reasonable and sane work environment. And that means setting client expectations or customer expectations such that they know what to expect when, and the deadlines that the developer has committed to, the developer is responsible for. So I think it's really a matter of planning. If you end up on a Thursday night pulling an all-nighter to be ready for a demo Friday morning, the problem did not occur on Thursday. The problem happened the previous Thursday or 3 Thursdays ago, when somebody committed and agreed to something they shouldn't have, or didn't properly take the time to estimate the thing that, or update their estimate. So typically, while the all-nighter might really realizing that the all-nighter is simply a symptom of the problem and not the problem itself, I think that's the first key. Hope that makes sense. I would say, so if your folks are pulling all-nighters, do a root cause after the all-nighter to ask why it needed to happen, how it could have been avoided, and look backward in time to see, at what point you should have known that things were bigger than you thought, or something had gotten missed, and how can you avoid doing that in the future. And then the last thing is, it's fine to call out a little bit of recognition for the team or the person that did the all-nighter, but don't make too big a deal out of it. We don't want people to feel super rewarded by this kind of practice, because frankly, we don't want them to do it on a regular basis. The next question looks like it is this question: how do you feel about plus or minus percent estimates for tasks. I try to avoid them personally because people just write down and remember the hour and never the plus or minus variance. Without simply doubling every task, is there a better way to convey uncertainty for unknown tasks? Yes, there's some great ways. First, I'd like to recommend to you Johanna Rothman's book, Predicting the Unpredictable, which is found on LeanPub primarily. Although as of today, I just was talking with her, she's got it on Amazon for pre-order. It'll be printed and sold through Pragmatic Press. But she gives a lot of great tips on estimating. And one of the things I would say, a couple of things, is first, never give a single number estimate. Even if you follow it, like you said, with this plus or minus 5 hours. If you tell me something is going to be 20 hours plus or minus 5 hours or plus or minus 25%, you're right on the money. The only thing I remember is 20 hours. Instead, a couple of things come to mind. First, always give estimates in terms of ranges. And this is not just one number, but offer 2 or maybe even 3-point ranges and label them as the pessimistic, the optimistic, and the realistic. And sometimes I even leave the realistic one out of there, and I will just put on there the pessimistic estimate, say 5 hours, and the pessimistic estimate might be 30 hours and the optimistic one might be 5. When you do that, you really communicate instantly there's a lot of unknown, right? My guess is the problem that is being addressed here isn't that it could be 5, but it might be 6. It's really the problem of it could be 5, but it might be 20. And so giving a range of estimates, I think, is going to do a lot of good because you're clearly communicating that there are unknowns. And if you can also then quantify clarifying questions, which will reduce the estimate or increase the accuracy of the estimate, that's a great place to do that. Another thing to realize is for you to use that as an opportunity to ask your client this question. Would you rather me give you an optimistic estimate, which I'm not sure of, or a pessimistic worst case estimate that might scare you? Now, that might seem really odd, but just starting to have that discussion with your client also communicates that there is uncertainty about the tasks that you are doing. And it's really important for you to clearly communicate that uncertainty, and actually for you not to feel ashamed of it. I have a lot of developers that I work with who tell me that their clients say to them, well, you're supposed to be an expert. Why can't you estimate this? Like, I can go to my mechanic and he can estimate, or I can go to my builder, my home builder, or my plumber, and he can estimate. Why can't you give me a better estimate? And this is what I usually tell them what to say. Builders estimate based on dollar amounts per square foot. If you want a certain kind of house, he'll charge you $150 per square foot. You can choose as many square feet as you want. The math is pretty simple. He's got that dollar value per square foot calculated and refined and padded because he builds a lot of the same kind of house over and over and over again. The mechanic, when you say how much will it cost to do my brakes, and he tells you $650, it's not primarily because he says, oh, I've done 1,000 brake jobs. He actually has a book that tells him a standard for how long brake jobs take, and he then applies that number times his shop rate, and that's how he gets his estimate. And that's why he can do work like that. But my guess is when people ask you to do work, you've never done this kind of work before. They haven't done this kind of work before. And by kind, I mean the specific thing they need done. And in fact, if they could just go buy it off the shelf, they would. So it could be that no one has done this exact thing before. After all, my guess is no client has ever hired you to build a word processor. It's software, they need it, but they can get it off the shelf because it's a very commonly solved problem. So when they hire you, instead of making a lot of guarantees about how long things will take, you can guarantee outcomes, but I like to say it like this. If you were going to try and find the fountain of youth, if you hired me to take you to the fountain of youth. No one's ever found the fountain of youth. But if you wanted to pay me money and you were looking to get there, I think the most important thing is not finding a guide that will tell you it takes 36 days to find the fountain of youth, but instead finding a guide who is very familiar with working in the jungle, because that's where the fountain of youth is in South America, versus the Arctic or versus the mountains. So when customers come to you, you can clearly and professionally relay to them there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty in what you're asking them to do, and you will do your professional best to give them estimates, update those estimates, but the reality is there are very few guarantees in life. And if they want a guarantee, then you are forced, unfortunately, to give them such a high number is that you're absorbing all the risk. If somebody comes and says, I want something that does X and Y and Z, and I've never seen it out there, but it's like Facebook meets Instagram meets something else, the reality is the only kind of estimate you could give them would be so large as it would have to pad for all the different risks that you'd be taking. And typically they would look at that and go, wow, that's 10 times or 100 times what other people are telling me. And you would have to say, yes, it is, because I have no idea, and you're asking me to absorb all the risk. So those are some ways to convey uncertainty. Again, I think Johanna's book does an excellent job. And in her book, she really talks about using this idea of the estimate and the uncertainty and asking questions like, do you want the realistic or my best guess or a pessimistic guess? Let's see, the next question we've got says, how can we and our developers accurately forecast effort and time on deliverable with semi-vague or changing requirements? Oh, this sounds familiar. Well, I don't think you can. I mean, clearly you're asking because you're wondering if there's a silver bullet to create accurate estimates. What I think you should do is, and you probably know this, break the problem down into as small a chunks as possible. It's much easier to accurately estimate small things than it is large things. Then get in the habit, give ranges of estimates for each item that gets broken down, and get in the habit of re-estimating. There's nothing that says you have to stick to your original estimate. And in fact, if you don't re-estimate, let's pretend you have a 4-week project. And at the beginning, you tell the client, this is 100 to 400 hours of work. That's a big variance. And he agrees, okay, let's go on this journey together and see what we can do. So you go a week in. And then maybe you show what you've done. It's very common Agile practice. Let's do a demonstration of the work that's been done. If you don't re-estimate at that point, you're really telling him, I have no new information about how long this is going to take. And my guess is that's not true. You may not want to have what you consider to be a difficult or confrontational discussion about estimates and money, but the reality is a week into that project, you know a tremendous amount more than you knew when you knew nothing. After all, you know something now, and before you knew almost nothing. So clearly you know more. So as soon as you know more and at regular intervals, re-estimate the project. Sit down with you or your team, rework the optimistic and pessimistic ranges of estimates, and send those to the clients. After all, telling the client a week in that the project appears to be bigger than you originally thought or smaller than you originally thought is A, responsible, because you're letting them know new information now that you have new information, and B, gets them in the habit, this is very important, gets them in the habit of receiving updated estimates. Now that's important because what we want is clients that aren't surprised when changes occur, when things get re-estimated. when the price moves, because the estimate and the price are typically closely tied. So start re-estimating early and do it on a regular basis, and that will be a way you can communicate to the client that this is a fluid process. Of course, most clients won't enter into a relationship until you have some kind of idea. So some of the things you can fix in the estimate are, for example, a sprint length and a sprint price. I used to do this. We would put 4 developers, a QA, and a project manager on the team. And we would say, we will work in 2-week sprints. And given it, we would assume a constant amount of effort, because we would then just price out the sprint. The sprint costs you $24,000, something like that. The only unknown then is, how many sprints do you need? And that becomes a different way of framing the conversation. And you can again give with a bit of road mapping and planning, you can say, I think we're going to need between 2 and 6 sprints. And every time we do a sprint, I will re-estimate how much is in front of you. I will listen to any new requirements you want to have, whether you want to decrease scope or, more likely, increase scope. And I will then give you an updated estimate. That's part of what I will deliver to you. Make sure you get paid for that re-estimating activity, and put that into a general project management or product owner bucket that gets billed out. Just build that into the activities you do. But I think the key to forecasting is forecasting in the small, and then also getting in the habit of reforecasting on a regular basis. All right, the next question we have, by the way, any questions you've got, if you're joining us, there's a Q&A app in the side of in the Google Hangout. Please use it to ask any questions you'd like about managing developers or projects or clients, or golly, anything I can help with. The next question that is been asked says, and I'll select it here, what do you do when you're nearing the end of a project? Oof, this is tough. And some component of the build just isn't coming together. If you don't know how to fix the problem yourself, how do you help the developer get past the challenge? Oh, I'm going to take the second part of that first. If you don't know how to fix the problem yourself, as development managers, or as simply as humans who hire developers, you're hiring them to be experts, but they're not perfect, right? So how can you help a developer if you don't know how to fix the problem? Well, there's a couple of things we could do. One, we could just yell at the developer, right? We've hired you. It's your job to fix the problem. We'll waggle our finger and say, go fix the problem. And we might even sprinkle in a little shame if we say, because you're just being lazy by not fixing that problem. I hired you to do it. I'd like to say that's probably not the best way to go about solving this. The way when I had developers that worked for me day in and day out at my company, the way I helped them solve dozens or hundreds of problems that I had no idea how to solve was first to have a discussion with them. I didn't ever almost accomplish this over email. It always happened either face-to-face or video or a phone call. And I would ask them to describe the problem to me and use their technical terms. I would say, don't dumb it down. Tell me about the problem. And I would just listen. So they're talking, and I have a development background, so I'm making notes about upcoming questions. But I'm listening to them talk about, oh, this library, or I can't get this to work, or this one thing. Now, here's a secret. You probably all know this, but if you Google for this, there's a concept called rubber decking, and you can do this for your developers. And basically, the idea is talking through the problem, even to an inanimate object like a coffee sleeve or a rubber duck in this case, something with a face typically helps, is 9 times out of 10, that's going to be what the developer needs to really break through the problem and to find a fix. Honestly, I can't tell you the number of times when I managed a team. I would be sitting in my corporate office wearing my corporate button-up shirt, and I would have a developer come in and say, I got this problem and I'm totally stuck. And I would say, okay, sit down, tell me about it. And they go, all right, well, I'm working in the system and this is happening and this other thing, and I just can't figure this one thing. Oh, but if I look in there, oh, I think I got it. And they would just get up and run away. And I would just smile and go back to my work. And they would stop in later and say, oh, I felt like such an idiot. I can't believe I figured it out, but I can't believe I bothered you. And I would say, no, that's exactly my job, is to just to help you work through these things. And sometimes just asking you to explain it is the best way. So if you have developers and you cannot fix their problem, which frankly should be the way it is, at least most of the time you're hiring experts and these people are better at it than you are, get them to talk about it. Get them to talk about it from different perspectives. Ask dumb questions. Well, are you sure the value of this data is as you think? Well, it sounds to me like this one thing isn't working like you thought it would be. Or have you ever thought about where can you put a print statement? So sometimes I would go over to their desk and I would sit down with them and I would say, since I'm really dumb, I just need some help. Why don't you put some print statements in here, old school? Why don't you put some debug breakpoints or messages in there and let's look at it. I almost never was the one to find the problem, but just by reminding them of basic debugging techniques and basic problem solving techniques, 9 times out of 10, they found the problem. In fact, I can't even remember a problem that a developer didn't find and move forward with, and they were able to resolve that mostly by getting them to talk it out. The other half of that question, though, what do you do when you're nearing the end of a project and some component of the that just isn't coming together? I mean, that's a little bit different problem, I think. That's a problem of there is a known in every project. Not everything will go smoothly and not everything will go to schedule. And so as soon as you see that red flag get raised, as soon as you start hearing from the developer, this is a little different than I thought, or this isn't working like I thought, we'll have to work through it, I'll figure it out today, that's a red flag. And we need to be proactively taking action on that red flag, whether it's discussing with the client, hey, we're having trouble with X, this happens, but it may push out the deadline, or it may cost more, or really following up with the developer much more often to get a clear picture of what's happening. That's really important. So, I mean, remember, these things we're doing, it's not science. It's not really engineering. You can't plan it out all in advance, which is, frankly, half the reason that we talk about things as being agile. So hopefully that answered questions. Also, if you're viewing today, certainly love to have your questions come in. This is a Q&A session, so I rely on your questions. Otherwise, you'll probably get to watch me type and do some other stuff for 30 minutes, and then we'll all drop off. One thing, there we go. There's a question coming in. And before I get to that, I do want to talk a little bit about this thing we call Agile and changing requirements, because I think there's a really important idea that oftentimes gets missed. Developers oftentimes have adopted Agile because they either A, just want to get to work, or B, they don't want to be held. Sometimes people will say, oh, well, you just don't want to have to give a real estimate. And we know that's not the case. But developers like the idea of Agile because they know there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty. But the whole purpose behind this Agile thing is less about making you as the developer feel good and being able to say, there's a lot of uncertainty. And it's actually more about giving the customer, the client, the opportunity to change their mind. Now, this might sound really crazy. Why would we want changing requirements? But the reality is on a 4-week or an 8-week project, it's pretty clear 25% of the way in that some of the original ideas, they were just dumb, right? And some new ideas the client has brought forth, or the team may have brought forth, those are really good ideas. Now, why does this happen? It happens because people make better decisions about products when they see something. When they see something on the screen, when they see something on their phone, when they see a design, they start to have aha moments, and they realize that some things are more important than others, and things they'd never even considered could be achieved. And I call that broadly the time value of ideas. And that is, in the same way as money has a time value, and that generally a dollar decreases value over time, that newer ideas have a time value relationship. Newer ideas are generally more valuable than older ideas. If you're 50% through on a project and the client has an idea for a new feature, my guess is that idea, having been influenced by what they saw you have actually built, may be a whole lot better quality idea than other ideas he had at the beginning when he thought all ideas were equally good and frankly equally amazing. So half of the challenge of doing software development with Agile and with really servicing your clients is going to be actually encouraging them to change scope. It's actually going to be to encourage them and ask them, are all these features you originally wanted still important? Now we're at 50% and you can see things on the screen. Do you have any new ideas about what's really going to make this a great product? My guess is if you open them up to that, a couple of things are going to happen. One, some of the old stuff, it'll get taken out. Yeah, that's not so important anymore. I'm not excited about it. Two, new stuff will come in. This is pretty common, right? Hey, I'm really excited about this because now that I'm using it, now that I see it on my device, I'm remembering something else. And wouldn't it be great if I could just tap that and that would happen. And you can, and because we are agile, we can simply say, yeah, great, that's a great idea. Let's put that in the backlog and let's get you a 2 to 3 point estimate on it. And you can decide when it's important. Is it more important than the things that we are currently working on, that we plan to work on the next sprint? Or is it less important? Do you want to take out some of the stuff we plan to work on next week and substitute this for it? The other thing that'll happen is your client will change the way they view you. Instead of simply being a vendor who says, no, you can't change anything. Like, we drew the blueprints out. This is an unchangeable plan. And if you want to change it, oh, I'm going to get so stressed. I guess that means I have to reestimate. I guess that it's going to be big. It's going to be terrible. A lot of clients are used to hearing vendors talk like this. And so if you're able to not talk like this, if you're able to encourage change, you'll find clients will be the client relationship will be stronger. The products will be better. And they will also be more likely to forgive you when things are not exactly as you thought they'd be, because heck, they weren't exactly as they thought they would be either. So that's my quick spiel on why you should encourage your clients to change their requirements, because they're going to make better decisions the more they work with what you've done and the more they see the product come to life. Let's see, another question says, how do you build a quality development team? And what traits do you look for in developers that you hire? What traits do I look for in developers that I hire? Well, the number one trait is actually not development skill, at least not when I'm building a full-time team. The first trait I look for is someone who I could actually stand to work with every day, and that's not everybody. Someone who I get along with. But let's pretend that I'm hiring this person to do a job, a contract programmer, to come in and get something done. Is skill and expertise important? Absolutely. Yep, for sure. Do I look at their GitHub? Do I look at their commits? Do I look at their code? Sure. Yep. Do I want to see a portfolio? Yep, very important. But for any of you that have hired developers and it hasn't worked out very well, my guess is the reason it didn't work out was not actually because they weren't good coders. It had to do with a lot of other reasons. For me personally, I have suffered from contract developers who took on the project and then overbooked themselves. I don't know if that's ever happened to you, and I don't know if you've ever done it, but knowing that you have the person is going to be committed to see the project through is really important. So having an upfront discussion about their time availability and any time off that they have, anything that's planned, and what do they see as the risks to things intruding in their lives and getting in the way. So coming up with a really almost a pessimistic view of how many hours they're going to put in, and making sure that that pessimistic view, that pessimistic number of hours fits your need. The other way is communication. Every developer will tell you they're great communicators, and typically at the beginning of the relationship, they act like it because they want your business. They're in sales mode. But unfortunately, it's not really true. Many of us are kind of poor communicators. I find the best measure of someone's communication and interpersonal skills is to ask for 3 professional references of other people they have done contract work for, or worked for as a full-time employee. And then call up those people and make sure you ask them about all the soft skills kinds of things. Things like, did they show up on time? Were they reliable? Did they deliver consistently? Did they put in a consistent amount of effort? Did they explain to you when things weren't going well in ways that you could understand and make decisions from? Were they good written communicators? Did they bring problems to your attention and offer a variety of solutions? All these soft skills actually become the thing that I'm most important, that I really look for when I hire developers, because I assume sort of a minimum standard of skills. If you're an iOS developer, I'm going to expect you've done 5 to 7 iOS apps of relative some kind of complexity, and it's pretty easy for me to gauge that. What I have to work a little bit harder at is determining if you're a good communicator, if you're an ethical person, if you overcommit habitually, or even if you might overcommit with me. And what do I do if you go dark? How do I get a hold of you? What are you willing to, how are you willing to be accountable to me and to the project? Building a quality development team. If you're building a permanent team, that is a whole other story. And I think you've got to hire for culture and train for skills and find people who not just naturally work well together, but who have a shared set of sort of core values built into them that align with what your core values are. And those are nice management-y statements, a way of saying people that you like to interact with and who are dependable and who care about the same things that you care about. Another question here, evidently from the description, I had forgotten about this. How do I lead when I'm so busy coding? Well, why are you coding if you're also supposed to be leading? And I realize that might be an entirely ridiculous question, but they are, as you say, very different activities. And the first thing is if you're responsible for cutting code as well as leading coders, knowing that both of those things are different and both of them require time. If you have to do both, then you have to time box them. You have to say, mornings I code and afternoons I lead, or the other way around, or Mondays I lead and Tuesdays I code and Fridays I lead, or something like that. But you know that coding is hard enough that you can't be constantly switching tasks between helping someone else, assign them tasks, overseeing their work, writing requirements, and sitting down to implement software. They're very different. So I would say you should, once the team size grows past 3, maybe 2, you have a full-time full-time leadership job in front of you. And that might sound pretty ridiculous, but given the amount of stuff that needs to happen in the software development lifecycle, which is not coding, which is probably going to be squarely on your plate, keeping 2 to 3 developers, especially full-time developers, busy is a job in and of itself. And let's just step back and let's pretend that we're leading a team that works for us now, okay? So if I've got 2 to 3 guys, is it more important that I keep those 2 to 3, and by guys I mean humans, not men, Is it more important that I keep those 2 to 3 code machines running at as high a capacity as I can? Or is it more important that I, once in a while, steal time away to go write some new feature? My guess is you should really try and keep the coders as productive as possible. That is your number one job. Keep them productive. That means you have all kinds of activities in front of you, such as, depending on your process, writing requirements, prioritizing requirements with the client, setting up estimation meetings, clarifying requirements. Ooh, whoever thought requirements weren't going to be clear up front? They're never clear. There's always developer questions. Code reviews, possibly afterwards. Testing, if that's part of your job before you hand it to the client. Coordinating demos, if that's part of your job. Keeping an eye on the budget and the time frame. Watching all those burn down charts so that you know if there's problems coming in your project, right? Let alone detailed technical things like communicating technical design, right? And ensuring that less senior developers that work for you are doing the work you need in the right way. Creating technical vision, right? Are there architectural things that need to be done or communicated so that the project is done as it needs to be done? Golly, my guess is it goes on and on. Helping, and we talked about helping your programmers work through roadblocks. There's all kinds of leadership things, correcting their behavior, helping them to get better at communicating, finding things they need to skill up on in terms of technical skills and soft skills. Selling, if you're the agency owner, man, you've got to be selling. So there's a lot of other stuff to be done, as you indicate. How do you lead when you're so busy coding? You've got to just stop trying to be the conductor and play the tuba in the orchestra at the same time. And that means you've got to take some risks. That means you've got to set clear expectations with your team about what it is that you need them to do, and you've got to hold them accountable. So leadership's a tough job, but if you've got more than, I'm going to go with more than 2 other people, you can be highly effective in keeping them going rather than trying to sit down and code the work yourself. Oh, and by the way, at first, this is going to feel super unsatisfying. I mean, it's going to be way better to just be coding yourself. It's going to feel better because at the end of the day, you can point to a feature on a screen or a module in a piece of code and say, I did that today. At first, when you do leadership things, it may feel like you're not doing anything. And at the end of the day, you're like, what did I really do? So you have to start changing your perception of your value and start measuring the whole team's output, realizing that you contribute to that, not that you're just overhead to that. Well, we've gone about 40 minutes. Looks like we've got a few folks with us. Love to hear any other questions that people have, and love to hear about pain points you've got. Are you finding the developers that you need? What's your biggest challenge after you hire them? Are they delivering the way you thought they should? Are your clients beating you up over timeframes? Are your clients giving you a lot of grief over budget and change? Anything is fair game here. And this is our first office hours with Gunio, but I'm sure you are here because you know about Gunio and their great service. I'm sure that you know what great guys Jake and the other folks there are, and certainly I want to plug their team and just say thank you to them for letting me have this time in front of you. You know what we've done? It's a few minutes early, but if there's no other questions, frankly, I'll just close out office hours and we'll say thank you very much. Love to hear from you on email. You can find me at marcusblankenship.com. I have a newsletter where I write about these kinds of things, and I have, I think you can actually download a 12-chapter mini ebook that I've written about this. And so love to hear feedback on that as well. My email is marcus@marcusblankenship.com. Hey, Jake, are you still with us?
I'm with us, and I just wanted to hop on and say thank you again, Marcus, for being here on the call and doing this. You were awesome and some great insights, so appreciate you taking the time.
Great. Thank you, Jake. Really appreciate the opportunity. Also want to thank everybody who attended and all your great questions. and talk to everybody soon. Thank you.